My wife said, "I can't bring you to Christmas. My ex is coming, and it will be awkward," after I bought her parents thoughtful gifts and planned to surprise her with a Tesla. So I left. Months later, she's begging me to come back. There's a moment, and if you've ever been blindsided by someone you love, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where time doesn't slow down like they say in the movies. It doesn't stretch into some dramatic, cinematic pause where you can gather your thoughts and prepare a dignified response. No, time just fractures. 1 second you're standing in your kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that's still too hot to drink, watching your wife of 4 years scroll through her phone with that little crease between her eyebrows she gets when she's stressed about something. And the next second, the words coming out of her mouth have rearranged the entire architecture of your reality. And you're standing in the rubble of everything you thought you knew, trying to figure out which way is up. "I can't bring you to Christmas this year." That's what she said. My wife, Meredith, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman whose family I'd spent the last 4 years trying to impress, trying to belong to, trying to earn my place within. I remember setting the coffee mug down on the counter very carefully, as if it were made of something precious and breakable, as if the mug mattered, as if anything in that kitchen mattered anymore. "I'm sorry," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm, too measured, like I was reading lines from a script I hadn't had time to rehearse. "I think I misheard you." Meredith didn't look up from her phone. She was doing that thing she did when she was uncomfortable, scrolling without actually seeing anything, her thumb moving in those little, repetitive swipes that meant she was buying time, avoiding eye contact, waiting for the conversation to just somehow resolve itself without her having to do the hard work of having it. "Brandon's coming," she said, as if that explained everything, as if those 2 words were a complete sentence, a full argument, a closed case. Brandon Whitmore, to be specific, her ex-boyfriend from college, the one she'd dated for 3 years before they'd broken up because, and I'm quoting Meredith here, "we just wanted different things." The one whose Instagram she still followed, whose posts she still liked, whose name still came up at family gatherings with a frequency that had always made me slightly uncomfortable, but that I'd learned to ignore because that's what you do when you love someone. You trust them. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You tell yourself that the past is the past and that you're the one she chose. You're the one she married. You're the one she comes home to every night. You're an idiot is what you are. But I didn't know that yet. Not fully. Not in the way I would come to know it. "Brandon's coming," I repeated slowly, tasting the words like they were something foreign on my tongue. "To your parents' house. For Christmas." My mom invited him. Meredith finally looked up, and there was something in her eyes that I couldn't quite read. Defensiveness, maybe, or guilt, or some complicated mixture of both. You know how she is. She and Brandon's mom are still close, and she thought it would be nice since he's going through a hard time right now. A hard time. His divorce just finalized. He's been really struggling. His divorce. Can you stop just repeating everything I say? Meredith's voice had an edge to it now, sharp and irritated, like I was the one being unreasonable here. Like I was the one who'd just dropped a bomb on our marriage and expected her to just accept the shrapnel with a smile. I took a breath, then another. In through the nose, out through the mouth, just like the meditation app I'd downloaded 6 months ago when work stress had started giving me tension, headaches, just like I was standing in a conference room, about to deliver a difficult presentation and not in my own kitchen discovering that my wife had apparently decided I was optional. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, and I was proud of how steady my voice was, how measured and controlled I sounded, even as something inside me was starting to crack. "Your mother invited your ex-boyfriend to Christmas dinner, the ex-boyfriend you dated for 3 years, and instead of telling her that was inappropriate or asking her to uninvite him or, I don't know, standing up for our marriage in any way whatsoever, Your solution is to just not bring me. It's not that simple. It seems pretty simple to me. You don't understand my family. Meredith set her phone down on the counter, finally, fully, giving me her attention like it was some kind of concession. You've never understood how complicated things are with them. Brandon's family and my family have been friends for 30 years. His mom is my mom's best friend. If I make a big deal out of this, it's going to cause all this drama. And then Christmas is going to be ruined, and everyone's going to be upset. And what about me? I interrupted. And there it was, the first crack in my voice, the first sign that the carefully constructed dam of my composure was starting to leak. What about how I feel? I'm your husband, Meredith. We've been married for 4 years. Doesn't that mean anything? Of course it means something. Then act like it. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight to it, that has texture and temperature and a specific gravity all its own. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear the old pipes in the walls doing that thing they did when the heat kicked on. I could hear from somewhere outside the distant sound of a car alarm that no one was going to bother silencing. Meredith bit her lip. She did that when she was thinking, when she was calculating, when she was trying to figure out how to get what she wanted without having to give up anything in return. I'd always found it endearing before. Now, it just looked like strategy. "What if I just go for the day?" she finally said. "I'll drive down Christmas morning, spend a few hours, and be back by dinner. We can have our own celebration that night, just the two of us. I'll make that roast you like, the one with the rosemary and the garlic, and we can open presents by the fire, and it'll be romantic. It'll be our own little Christmas. While I sit home alone all day knowing that you're with your ex-boyfriend. He's not my anything. He's just a man you were in love with for 3 years, who your mother apparently thinks is more important to have at Christmas than your actual husband. That's not fair, isn't it?" Meredith's jaw tightened. I could see the frustration building in her, could see the way her hands were clenching and unclenching at her sides, like she was physically restraining herself from saying something she knew she couldn't take back. But here's the thing about restraint. It only works if both people are exercising it. "You know what?" she said, and her voice was cold now, hard in a way I hadn't heard before. "Maybe if you'd made more of an effort with my family over the years, this wouldn't be such a big deal. Maybe if my parents actually knew you, actually felt comfortable with you, they wouldn't have invited Brandon in the first place." I felt like I'd been slapped. No, I felt like I'd been slapped and then told I deserved it. "I have made an effort," I said quietly. "I've made so much effort. Every holiday, every birthday, every random Sunday dinner your mother decided to throw together at the last minute. I've shown up. I've brought gifts. I've helped in the kitchen and made small talk with your dad about sports I don't even follow. And pretended not to notice when your mom made comments about how Brandon always remembered her favorite wine. That's not. It is, though. It is exactly that. I have tried, Meredith. For 4 years, I have tried to earn my place in your family, and apparently, I've failed so spectacularly that they'd rather have your divorced ex-boyfriend at Christmas than me. You're being dramatic. Am I?" Another silence. Longer this time. Heavier. I thought about the gifts I'd already bought for her family. The cashmere scarf I'd spent weeks researching because I'd overheard her mother mention once, in passing, that she'd always wanted one in that specific shade of blue that matched her eyes. The vintage record player I'd tracked down for her father, after he'd told me about the one he'd had as a teenager. The one his parents had thrown away when they moved, and that he'd always regretted losing. The first edition copy of To Kill a Mockingbird I'd found for her grandmother, who taught English for 40 years and still talked about the day she'd first read that book, like it was a religious experience. Hours of research, hundreds of dollars, countless moments of care and thought and attention to detail. and none of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered. "I should tell you something," I said, and my voice sounded different now, quieter, more distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. Meredith looked at me warily. "What?" "I was going to surprise you this year. For Christmas. I've been planning it for months." "Surprise me with what?" I almost laughed. Almost. There was something darkly funny about this moment, something absurd and tragic and ridiculous all at once. Here I was, about to reveal the grand romantic gesture I'd been planning for half a year. And it was going to land in the middle of a conversation about whether or not I deserved to spend the holiday with my own wife. "A Tesla," I said. "Model 3, long range. In that blue color, you always say looks like the ocean. I've been saving for 2 years, Meredith. Working overtime, taking on extra projects, putting money away every single month. I was going to have it delivered Christmas morning with a big red bow on it. And I was going to bring you outside and watch your face when you saw it. And I thought..." I stopped, swallowed, forced myself to continue. "I thought it was going to be the happiest moment of our lives. I thought you were going to cry and hug me and tell me I was the best husband in the world. I thought we were going to drive down to your parents' house in your new car. And everyone was going to see how much I loved you, how much I was willing to sacrifice to make you happy." Meredith's face had gone pale. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide in that specific way that meant she was genuinely shocked, genuinely caught off guard. It was the face of someone who'd been playing a game and suddenly realized the stakes were much higher than she'd thought. "Marcus," she breathed. "I didn't..." "No," I finished for her. "No, you didn't, because it was supposed to be a surprise. Because I wanted to see your face when you realized how much I loved you, how hard I'd been working to give you something you'd wanted for years." I don't know what to say. Say you'll tell your mother that your husband is coming to Christmas. Say you'll stand up for our marriage. Say that I matter more to you than some ex-boyfriend's feelings. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. And in that silence, I watched my wife's face go through a series of expressions: guilt, calculation, frustration, and finally, something that looked almost like resentment. Like I'd put her in an impossible position by loving her too much, by expecting too much, by having the audacity to think I deserved a place at her family's table. "I can't," she finally said. "I already told my mom I was coming alone. I can't change it now. It would be too awkward." Too awkward. "I know how this looks. I know you're upset. But can we please just..." "No." The word came out of me like something that had been waiting a long time to escape. Like a bird that had finally found an open window after years of beating its wings against the glass. "No," I said again, and this time my voice was stronger, clearer, more certain. "We can't just anything, Meredith. We can't just pretend this is okay. We can't just sweep this under the rug and move on like nothing happened." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I deserve better than this. I'm saying that after 4 years of marriage, I shouldn't have to fight for an invitation to spend Christmas with my own wife. I'm saying that if Brandon matters more to you than I do, then maybe..." I stopped. The words I wanted to say were right there, sitting on the tip of my tongue, waiting to change everything. But saying them felt like jumping off a cliff, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the fall. "Maybe what?" Meredith's voice was barely a whisper. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in maybe years. Saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I'd married, the woman I'd built my entire future around. Saw the stranger she was becoming, or maybe had always been, hidden behind a mask I'd been too in love to see through. "Maybe we need to think about what we really want," I said, "because I know what I want. I want a wife who's proud to be married to me, who doesn't hide me away like I'm something to be ashamed of, who chooses me every single day without hesitation or conditions or qualifications. I do choose you. No, Meredith, you don't. If you did, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I turned away from her then, because I couldn't look at her face anymore. Couldn't see the tears that were starting to form in her eyes. Couldn't let myself be moved by them. I'd been moved by her tears too many times before. Had let them wash away my concerns and my objections and my basic self-respect. Not this time. Where are you going? She asked as I walked toward the door. I don't know. Out. Somewhere. Anywhere but here. Marcus, please. Can we just talk about this? I stopped with my hand on the doorknob, took one more breath, let it out slowly. We've talked, I said without turning around, and you've made your choice clear. Now I need to figure out mine. Then I opened the door and walked out into the cold December air, leaving behind my wife, my marriage, and every naive belief I'd ever had about love being enough. I didn't know where I was going. That's not entirely true. I knew I was driving north on Highway 101, knew I was leaving San Jose behind in my rearview mirror, knew that the further I got from the house I shared with Meredith, the easier it became to breathe. But in terms of destination, of plan, of anything resembling a rational decision, I had nothing. Just a full tank of gas, a credit card with a decent limit, and the kind of soul-deep exhaustion that comes from realizing the life you've been living isn't the life you thought it was. My phone started buzzing about 20 minutes into the drive. Meredith, of course. First a text, "Where are you?" Then another, "Can you please just come home so we can talk?" Then a third, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you, please." I didn't respond, not because I was trying to punish her, or maybe that was part of it if I'm being completely honest with myself, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. What words could possibly bridge the gap between where we'd been that morning and where we were now? What combination of letters and syllables could make sense of the fact that my wife had chosen her ex-boyfriend's comfort over her husband's presence? The fourth text came around the time I was passing through Palo Alto. This is really immature, Marcus. Running away doesn't solve anything. That one almost made me laugh. Immature. As if I was the one who'd created this situation. As if I was the childish one for not accepting my assigned role as the disposable husband, the optional accessory, the man whose place at the table was determined by whether or not it would be awkward for someone else. I turned off my phone. The road stretched out ahead of me, gray and endless, disappearing into a fog that had rolled in from the coast. December in Northern California doesn't look like the Christmas cards. No snow, no icicles, no picturesque winter wonderlands. Just rain and mist and the kind of damp cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. I found myself thinking about how Meredith and I had met. It was at a conference, of all places. One of those tech industry networking events where everyone has a lanyard around their neck and a drink in their hand, and no one actually wants to be there, but everyone pretends otherwise, because that's how careers are built. I'd been standing by the window watching the San Francisco skyline and wondering how soon I could leave without seeming antisocial, when she'd walked up to me and said, "You look exactly as miserable as I feel." I remember laughing. Remember being caught off guard by her honesty, her directness, the way she didn't seem to care about the usual social niceties that governed these events. She was beautiful. Dark hair, green eyes, a smile that felt like being let in on a secret. But it was more than that. It was the way she looked at me like she actually saw me, like I was more than just another face in a crowd of interchangeable tech workers. We talked for 3 hours that night, missed the keynote speaker entirely, ended up at a diner down the street, eating pancakes at midnight, and telling each other our life stories like we'd known each other forever, and just happened to be catching up. She told me about growing up in Los Gatos, about her parents' money and their expectations, and the suffocating pressure of being their only daughter. Told me about me, Brandon, not by name, but I'd later learn it was him, and how she'd finally broken free of a relationship that was comfortable but not passionate. Told me about wanting something real, something that challenged her, someone who saw her as more than just her family's wealth and connections. I told her about my own background, the opposite of hers in every way. Growing up poor in a small town in Oregon, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't always keep the lights on. Working my way through community college, then state school, then finally landing a job at a startup that had somehow, against all odds, actually succeeded. I told her about feeling like an imposter in every room I entered, like someone who'd snuck into a party they weren't invited to and was just waiting to be thrown out. She'd reached across the table and taken my hand. "You're not an imposter," she'd said. "You're exactly who you're supposed to be." That was when I fell in love with her. Not gradually, not over time, but in that single moment, with her fingers wrapped around mine and the fluorescent lights of the diner buzzing overhead and the smell of coffee and bacon grease hanging in the air. If you've ever fallen in love that way, sudden and complete and terrifying, you know what I mean when I say I never stood a chance. We were married 8 months later. Her parents had not been thrilled. I learned this not from anything they said directly, but from the 1,000 small signals that wealthy people use to communicate disapproval without ever having to stoop to the vulgarity of actually saying what they mean. The way her mother would look at my shoes when I walked in the door, as if assessing their quality and finding it lacking. The way her father would ask about my job in a tone that suggested he was humoring a child's pretend game. The way they would talk about Brandon, always casually, always in passing, and then glance at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. "They just need time to get to know you," Meredith would say whenever I brought it up. "They're protective, that's all. They'll come around." 4 years later, they hadn't come around. And apparently, given the choice between their daughter's husband and their daughter's ex-boyfriend, the decision wasn't even close. I drove until the fog got so thick I could barely see the road in front of me. Somewhere north of San Francisco, I pulled off at a rest stop and sat in my car, staring at the whiteness outside my window, trying to figure out what to do next. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through years of poverty and struggle and worked its way up to a 6-figure salary through sheer determination, that part told me to turn around, go home, have a conversation with my wife like an adult, work through this like responsible people worked through problems in their marriages. But there was another part of me, a part I hadn't listened to in a very long time, that was saying something different. That part was saying, "This isn't the first time, is it?" And as I sat there in the fog, letting that thought unspool, I realized it was right. This wasn't the first time Meredith had made me feel like an afterthought in my own marriage. There was the vacation to Italy 2 years ago, when her college friends had organized a group trip, and she'd somehow forgotten to ask if I could join until all the arrangements had already been made. "It's just easier this way," she'd said when I expressed hurt. "You wouldn't know anyone anyway." There was the charity gala last spring, when she'd introduced me to a colleague as my husband, Michael, getting my name wrong in front of a room full of people, and then laughing it off like it was a cute little mistake rather than a sign of something deeply wrong. There was the business dinner with her father's partners, where I'd been seated at the far end of the table, away from Meredith, next to an elderly woman who spent the entire meal talking about her cats while I watched my wife laugh and joke with the men her father wanted her to impress. 1,000 small cuts, and I'd bled from every one of them without ever stopping to wonder if maybe I should be concerned about all the blood. My phone was still off. I didn't know how long I'd been sitting there. Minutes, hours, some elastic stretch of time that had lost all meaning. The fog outside was starting to thin, revealing a world that looked gray and washed out, like a photograph left in the sun too long. I turned the car back on, checked my rearview mirror, made a decision. I wasn't going home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I needed time, space, a chance to think without Meredith's tears or explanations or justifications clouding my judgment. A chance to figure out who I was when I wasn't trying so desperately to be the man she wanted me to be. I had vacation time saved up, 3 weeks of it actually, because I was the kind of employee who never took time off, who worked through holidays and weekends, because I'd spent so long being poor that the fear of losing my job never quite went away. I could use that time now, go somewhere, anywhere, give myself the Christmas gift I really needed, the gift of perspective. I pulled back onto the highway and kept driving north. I found the cabin by accident, or maybe by fate, if you believe in that sort of thing. I'm still not sure what I believe, but I know that the moment I saw it, something in my chest loosened for the first time in hours. It was in a small town called Mendocino, perched on the edge of the northern California coast, where the ocean crashed against cliffs and the air smelled like salt and pine and possibility. I'd stopped to get gas and coffee and had seen a handwritten sign in the window of the local cafe. Cabin for rent, weekly rates, ocean view, inquire within. The owner was an older woman named Ruth who had gray hair, pulled back in a braid, and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that comes from decades of living exactly the life you want to live. She didn't ask me why I needed a cabin 3 days before Christmas. Didn't ask me why I was alone, or why I paid in cash, or why I had the look of a man who'd just watched his entire life collapse like a building with a faulty foundation. She just handed me a key and gave me directions and said, "There's firewood stacked around back. Nearest grocery is 10 minutes south. Cell service is spotty, but the landline works fine if you need to call anyone." I didn't need to call anyone. The cabin was small, just a single room with a kitchen nook, a bed with a worn quilt, and a wood-burning stove that had clearly been someone's pride and joy about 30 years ago. But the window looked out over the ocean, and when I opened it, I could hear the waves and the seabirds and the wind moving through the cypress trees. And for the first time since that morning, I felt like I could breathe. I turned my phone on just long enough to send one message to Meredith. "I need some time to think. I'm safe. Please don't contact me." Then I turned it off again, threw it in my bag, and spent the next 3 days doing absolutely nothing. If you've never experienced the luxury of nothing, you don't know what you're missing. In our always on, always connected, always optimizing world, doing nothing feels almost radical, subversive. Like you're breaking some unspoken rule that says your worth is measured in productivity, in output, in the relentless accumulation of accomplishments and achievements. I slept 12 hours a day. I took long walks along the cliffs, letting the wind whip my face and the spray from the waves soak my clothes. I made simple meals, eggs, toast, soup from a can, and ate them standing at the window, watching the gray water churn beneath the gray sky. And I thought about my marriage, really thought about it, without the rose-colored glasses I've been wearing for 4 years. I made myself remember every moment of doubt, every flash of hurt, every time I'd swallowed my pride, or ignored my instincts, or convinced myself that things weren't as bad as they seemed. The picture that emerged was not pretty. It was a picture of a man so desperate to be loved, so afraid of being abandoned, that he'd accepted crumbs and called them a feast. A man who'd been so grateful to be chosen by someone like Meredith, beautiful, wealthy, from a good family, that he'd never stopped to wonder if he actually liked the life they were building together, or if he was just afraid of being alone. I thought about the Tesla sitting in a storage unit in San Jose, waiting to be delivered. The surprise that would never happen now. The joy I'd imagined on Meredith's face, the tears, the embrace, the validation that I was a good husband, a worthy partner, a man who deserved to be loved. That was the thing, wasn't it? The root of everything. I'd spent my entire life trying to be worthy, worthy of my mother's sacrifices, worthy of my teacher's belief in me, worthy of every opportunity I'd clawed my way to. And when Meredith came along, I'd transferred all of that desperation onto her. I'd made her the arbiter of my value, the judge of my worth, The person whose love would finally prove that I wasn't the poor kid from Oregon who didn't belong anywhere. But no one can carry that burden. No one should have to. And by putting it on Meredith, I'd made it impossible for either of us to have a real relationship. I wasn't her partner. I was her supplicant. And she'd treated me accordingly. On Christmas Eve, I built a fire in the old stove and sat watching the flames dance, thinking about all the Christmases of my childhood. The years when there wasn't enough money for presents, when my mother would wrap up necessities, socks, toothpaste, a new notebook for school, in newspaper and pretend it was a celebration. The years she'd saved for months to buy me a used bicycle, and I'd cried not because I was happy, but because I knew how much she'd sacrificed, and I felt guilty for wanting anything at all. I'd spent so long running from that kid, building a life that looked nothing like the one I'd come from, accumulating all the markers of success, the good job, the nice car, the beautiful wife, the respect of people who would have looked right through me 20 years ago. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost something too. I'd lost the kid who was grateful for newspaper-wrapped socks, lost the young man who knew that love wasn't about what you could give someone, but about how you showed up for them when you had nothing to give at all. Meredith had never known that version of me. I'd hidden him away, ashamed of where I came from, afraid that if she saw the truth of my past, she'd realize I wasn't worthy of her after all. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe the man I'd been pretending to be, confident, polished, successful, worthy, maybe that man was the imposter. And maybe it was time to find out who I really was when I stopped performing. Christmas morning dawned gray and quiet, the ocean a flat expanse of silver, beneath a sky full of clouds. I made myself coffee and sat on the small porch overlooking the water, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like cedar and wood smoke, and I let myself feel everything I'd been trying not to feel. The grief, the anger, the betrayal, the bone-deep exhaustion of trying so hard for so long and still not being enough. And underneath all of that, something else. Something that felt almost like relief. Because here's the thing about hitting bottom. Once you're there, you don't have to keep falling anymore. I didn't know what my marriage would look like when I went back. Didn't know if I even wanted to save it, or if I was finally ready to admit that some things can't be saved and shouldn't be. But I knew that whatever came next, it would be different. I would be different. No more performing. No more auditioning for acceptance. No more measuring my worth by how well I could convince someone else to love me. Whatever I was worth, I was going to figure it out for myself, and if Meredith couldn't accept that, if she couldn't love the man I actually was instead of the man I'd been pretending to be, then at least I'd know. At least I'd stop wasting both of our lives on a relationship that was never going to be what either of us deserved. I finished my coffee and went inside to pack my bag. It was time to go home. The house looked exactly the same. I don't know why I expected it to look different. It had only been a week since I'd left. But somehow I thought the changes I'd undergone would be visible in the physical world too. Like the walls would have shifted slightly, or the garden would have grown wild, or the paint would have faded to reflect the erosion happening inside our marriage. But no. Same beige stucco, same red door, same perfectly manicured lawn that the gardener maintained whether we were home or not. The house looked like it had always looked, expensive, tasteful, and utterly devoid of any indication that actual humans lived inside it. Meredith's car was in the driveway, the silver BMW her father had bought her for her 30th birthday. The one that cost more than my entire childhood. I sat in my own car, a sensible Honda Accord that I'd paid off 2 years ago, and stared at it for a long moment, preparing myself for what came next. The week in Mendocino had given me clarity, but clarity isn't the same as courage. I knew what I needed to say. I just wasn't sure I had the strength to say it, but I'd come this far, driven 5 hours through holiday traffic, rehearsing speeches in my head, playing out scenarios like chess moves. I couldn't lose my nerve now. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. My key still worked, which felt significant somehow. I'd half expected her to have changed the locks, or at least to have put the chain on. But the door swung open easily, and I stepped into the house that still smelled like her perfume and the pine-scented candles she liked to burn in winter. "Meredith?" No answer. The house was quiet, but not empty. I could feel her presence the way you can always feel the presence of someone you've shared space with for years. She was here somewhere, probably in the bedroom, probably waiting for me to come find her so she could gauge my mood before deciding how to play this. I didn't go to her. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and sat down at the table, the same table where everything had fallen apart a week ago, and I waited. It took her about 15 minutes to emerge. 15 minutes during which I imagined she was checking her reflection, composing her face, preparing her arguments. When she finally appeared in the doorway, she looked beautiful and terrible all at once, dark circles under her eyes, hair that hadn't been brushed, wearing one of my old t-shirts like some kind of peace offering. "You're back," she said, and then, because she couldn't help herself, "You were gone for a week. I didn't know if you were ever coming back." I needed time to think. "I know. I got your message." She came closer, pulled out the chair across from me, sat down with her hands folded on the table like a student waiting for a test she knew she was going to fail. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry. I should never have—" "Stop." She stopped. Her eyes went wide, startled by the authority in my voice. I was startled by it too, to be honest. I'd never interrupted her before. Never been the one to set the terms of a conversation. That wasn't how things worked in our marriage. But things were different now. I was different now. "I don't want your apologies," I said. "I don't want your explanations, or your justifications, or your tears. What I want, what I need, is for you to be honest with me, really honest, maybe for the first time since we met." "I've always been honest with you." "Have you?" I held her gaze, and I watched her look away first. "Then tell me about Brandon. Not what you've told me before, the sanitized version. Tell me the truth." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. I could see Meredith's jaw working, could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. She was trying to figure out how much I knew, how much she needed to admit to, how to give me just enough truth to satisfy me without giving away too much. I was done with that game. "Your mother didn't just invite Brandon to Christmas," I said. "Did she?" "I don't know what you—" "Meredith." I had a lot of time to think this week. A lot of time to go back over the last 4 years and notice all the things I'd been trying not to notice. And one of the things I noticed was how often your mother talks about Brandon. How often he comes up in conversation. How often his name appears on your phone when you don't think I'm looking. Her face went pale. "You went through my phone?" "No, I didn't have to. You're not as subtle as you think you are." I leaned forward, elbows on the table, trying to project a calm I didn't entirely feel. "I'm going to ask you this once, and I want the truth. Have you been talking to Brandon, behind my back, throughout our entire marriage?" The silence stretched on. 10 seconds, 20, 30, and then, like a dam finally breaking, the truth came pouring out. "Yes," Meredith whispered. "Okay, yes, I've been talking to him. Not all the time, but yes. He reaches out sometimes, and I respond. I know I shouldn't, but I do." "What do you talk about?" "Everything, nothing, I don't know. How our lives are going, what we're up to. Sometimes we get lunch when he's in town." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face now. "But I never cheated on you, Marcus. Never, I swear. He's someone who knew me before. Someone who understands where I come from, who I am, without me having to explain it. Without you having to explain it." I repeated the words slowly, letting their implications sink in. "Because you've never felt like you could be yourself with me." That's not, that's exactly what you're saying. You're saying that even after 4 years of marriage, you feel more comfortable talking to your ex-boyfriend than you do talking to your husband. You're saying that there's a whole part of yourself you've never shown me, a whole relationship you've been carrying on in parallel with ours because I'm not enough, because I've never been enough. You're twisting my words. Am I? More tears, more silence. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. Your parents never wanted you to marry me, I said. It wasn't a question. They wanted you to marry Brandon. And you, some part of you, wanted the same thing. But he wasn't ready, or you weren't ready. And so you settled for me instead. The safe choice, the backup plan, the man who would work hard enough and love you desperately enough that you could have the appearance of a happy marriage while still keeping your options open. That's not fair, isn't it? Meredith's hands were shaking. I watched her try to compose herself, try to find the words that would make this all okay, that would convince me I was wrong, and she was right, and everything could go back to the way it was before. But there were no such words. We'd gone too far, seen too much. The illusion we'd both been maintaining had finally cracked beyond repair, and there was nothing underneath it but the cold, hard truth. I love you, Marcus, she said, and her voice broke on my name. I do. Maybe not in the way you wanted, maybe not in the way you deserved, but I do love you. You have to believe that. I believe that you believe that, I said. I believe that you've convinced yourself that what we have is love. But, Meredith, love doesn't hide. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't make you feel like you have to choose between your husband and your ex-boyfriend for Christmas dinner. I know, and I'm sorry. I'll fix it, I swear. I'll tell my mother that Brandon isn't welcome at family events anymore. I'll block his number. I'll never speak to him again. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. Just please don't give up on us. I looked at her, really looked at her, the way I had that morning a week ago, the way I'd been trying to avoid looking at her for 4 years. And I saw a woman I barely recognized, a woman who was terrified, not of losing me, but of losing the life she'd built around me, the status of being married, the convenience of having someone to come home to, the security of knowing there was a fallback plan if things with Brandon or whoever came next didn't work out. She didn't love me. Maybe she never had. She loved what I represented. Stability, devotion, the willingness to accept whatever she was willing to give. And I was done being that person. I'm not giving up, I said quietly. I'm waking up. There's a difference. What does that mean? It means I'm leaving, Meredith. Not temporarily, not to think. I'm leaving this marriage. The sound she made was something between a gasp and a sob. You can't just decide that without giving me a chance to. I gave you 4 years of chances. I gave you every ounce of love and devotion I had. And it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, because I can't compete with a ghost. I can't compete with the life your parents wanted for you, or the man they wished you'd married, or the version of yourself you only show to other people. Please. She reached across the table, tried to take my hand. I pulled away. Please, Marcus. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. We'll go to couples counseling. I'll cut off contact with everyone who... No. That one word spoken softly stopped her mid-sentence. No, I said again. I don't want you to cut off contact with everyone. I don't want you to change who you are or pretend to be someone you're not. I want you to be happy, Meredith. I genuinely do. But I can't be the one to make you happy. I can't be the one you settle for while you're waiting for something better. I never settled for you. You did. We both know it. The only difference is that you've known it all along, and I'm just figuring it out now. She was crying openly, tears streaming down her face, her composure completely shattered. And part of me, The part that had loved her for 4 years, that still loved her in some wounded, complicated way. That part wanted to reach out and comfort her. Wanted to take back everything I'd said and hold her and tell her we could work through this. We could fix it. We could be happy if we just tried hard enough. But I'd spent 4 years trying hard enough. I'd exhausted myself on the altar of hard enough. It was time to try something else. I'm going to stay with a friend tonight, I said, standing up from the table. Tomorrow I'll come back to get some of my things. We can talk logistics later. Lawyers, division of assets, all the practical stuff. I'm not trying to hurt you or punish you. I paused, trying to find the right words, trying to express something that felt impossible to articulate. I just need to learn how to want something for myself, I finally said, without it being defined by whether or not it makes someone else happy. Does that make sense? Meredith didn't answer. She just sat there, tears running down her cheeks, looking at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe the man she'd married, the eager to please, desperate for approval, grateful for crumbs version of me, maybe that man was dying in this very moment. And the person who would take his place was someone neither of us had met yet. I picked up my keys from where I'd dropped them on the counter, took one last look around the kitchen that would never be mine again, felt something shift in my chest, some final letting go. Goodbye, Meredith, I said. And I walked out the door. Finding a place to live when you're newly separated and it's the week between Christmas and New Year's is approximately as fun as it sounds. I spent 3 nights on my friend Dave's couch. Dave from work, the only person I could think to call who wouldn't ask too many questions. Before I found a furnished studio apartment in a complex off the freeway that catered to people in exactly my situation. The recently divorced, the suddenly single, the walking wounded who needed a place to crash while they figured out what came next. The apartment was small, beige walls, beige carpet, beige curtains that did nothing to block out the sound of traffic from the highway below. The furniture was the kind that came from catalogs, designed for corporate housing, functional, forgettable, entirely without personality. I loved it. That probably sounds strange. Most people, walking into a place like that after living in a 4-bedroom house with granite countertops and a professionally landscaped yard, would feel like they were taking a step down, a massive, humiliating step down from the life they'd built to something that looked more like the life they'd escaped. But to me, that beige apartment represented something precious. A blank slate. No expectations, no history, no memories of fights or disappointments or moments when I'd felt invisible in my own home. Just 4 walls and a roof, and the chance to figure out who I was when I wasn't trying to be someone else's version of acceptable. I set up my laptop on the small desk by the window, hung a few of my favorite books on the shelf above the bed, found a coffee maker at the Goodwill down the street, and set it up on the counter with a mug that said "World's Okayest Everything," which felt appropriately self-deprecating for my current situation. And then I started to rebuild. The first step was work. I'd taken 2 weeks of vacation time, but those weeks were almost up, and I needed to figure out how to show up at the office without my personal life becoming the subject of water cooler gossip. This turned out to be easier than expected. The tech industry is full of people who've been through divorces, the long hours, the high stress. The tendency to prioritize work over relationships takes its toll. When I mentioned to my manager that I was going through some personal stuff and might need some flexibility, she just nodded knowingly and told me to take whatever time I needed. "The company will survive," she said. "Make sure you do too." The second step was lawyers. This was harder. I'd never hired a lawyer before, never needed to navigate the Byzantine world of divorce proceedings. But I found someone, a woman named Patricia Chen, who came highly recommended and has the kind of brisk, no-nonsense manner that made me feel like I was in capable hands. "Community property state," she said during our first meeting, ticking off points on her fingers like she was reviewing a checklist. Everything acquired during the marriage gets split 50-50. No kids, which simplifies things. The house is in both your names? Yes. Any prenup? No. I'd offered to sign one before the wedding, knowing how much wealthier Meredith's family was than mine. She'd refused, said it would feel like we were planning for failure. Now I wondered if that decision had been romantic or just convenient for her. Okay, here's how this is probably going to go. You'll either agree on a settlement, who gets what, how to divide accounts, whether to sell the house or buy each other out, or you'll let a judge decide. The more you can agree on outside of court, the cheaper and faster this will be. I don't want to fight, I said. I just want this to be over. Patricia looked at me with something that might have been sympathy or might have been skepticism. Everyone says that at the beginning. Then the anger sets in. She wasn't wrong. The anger came about a week into January, hitting me like a wave I hadn't seen coming. One minute I was fine, going through the motions, handling logistics, feeling vaguely numb, and the next I was furious. Absolutely white-hot, punch a wall, and break your hand, furious. 4 years. I'd given her 4 years of my life. 4 years of trying to be good enough. 4 years of ignoring my own needs and desires and instincts because I was so desperate to make this work. And she'd been talking to Brandon the whole time, meeting him for lunch, sharing pieces of herself that she'd never shared with me. I thought about the Tesla sitting in that storage unit, the surprise that would never happen now, all those months of saving, of planning, of imagining the look on her face when she saw what I'd done for her. What a fool I'd been. What an absolute pathetic fool. I thought about going back to the storage unit, buying the car for myself, driving it around San Jose and making sure Meredith saw me in it, making sure she knew what she'd thrown away. But that felt petty, childish, like something the old version of me would do, the version who still measured his worth by her reaction. Instead, I called the dealership and canceled the order, got my deposit back, put the money in a savings account, and tried not to think about what I'd almost given to someone who'd never really wanted it. The weeks that followed were a blur of new routines and old griefs. I started going to the gym again, something I'd let slide during my marriage, because Meredith didn't like how long it took, didn't like how tired it made me, didn't like the smell of sweat on my clothes when I got home. Now I could go whenever I wanted, for as long as I wanted, without having to justify it to anyone. Rediscovered cooking, real cooking, the kind that takes time and attention and involves ingredients you can't pronounce. I'd learned to cook as a teenager. Out of necessity, my mother was always at work, and someone had to make sure I didn't starve. But I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it. The meditation of chopping vegetables, the alchemy of turning raw ingredients into something delicious, the satisfaction of a meal that was just for me, made exactly the way I liked it. I started reading again, fiction mostly, which I'd stopped reading somewhere along the way because it didn't feel productive enough. But now I had time to waste, hours to fill, and I remembered how much I loved disappearing into someone else's story, how freeing it felt to care about characters who didn't exist, whose problems weren't my problems, whose resolutions came after 300 pages instead of never. And slowly, inch by inch, I started to remember who I was. Not Meredith's husband, not the guy who'd clawed his way out of poverty only to spend his adulthood apologizing for where he came from, not the imposter who'd somehow fooled everyone into thinking he belonged, just Marcus, a 34-year-old man with a decent job and a complicated past, and a future that was, for the first time in years, entirely his own to define. It wasn't easy. There were nights I sat in that beige apartment and felt so lonely I could barely breathe. Nights I almost called Meredith, almost went back, almost convinced myself that a bad marriage was better than no marriage at all. But every time I got close to breaking, I thought about that conversation in the kitchen. The way she'd looked at me when I told her I was leaving. Not like she was losing the love of her life, like she was losing a useful appliance. and I would put down the phone and go to sleep and wake up the next morning still alone, still hurting, but still free. It was a Tuesday in late February when everything changed. I know the exact day because I'd just come back from the gym, feeling pretty good about myself for the first time in months. I'd lost 15 pounds, gained some muscle, started to look less like a man who'd spent 4 years slowly dying inside and more like someone who might actually have a future. I was scrolling through my email, deleting spam, when I saw a message from Patricia with the subject line, "Financial disclosures, review needed." The divorce was proceeding slowly as divorces do. Meredith and I had agreed to mediation rather than litigation, which Patricia had said would save time and money. So far, we'd sorted out most of the easy stuff. I'd keep my retirement accounts, she'd keep hers, we'd split the joint savings. The house was the sticking point. Neither of us wanted to sell, and neither of us could afford to buy the other out. I'd assumed the financial disclosures would be straightforward. We'd both provided bank statements, tax returns, the usual documentation. I'd been scrupulously honest about everything, because that's the kind of person I am, even when I'm angry, even when it would be easy to hide things. What I hadn't expected was for Meredith to be anything less than honest. Patricia had attached several documents to her email, Meredith's disclosures, her bank statements, her investment accounts, and buried in those documents, like a landmine waiting to explode, was something I'd never known existed. A trust account, in Meredith's name, funded by her parents, worth $2.3 million. I sat there for a long time, staring at the number on my screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. $2.3 million. More than 7 times my annual salary. More than enough to buy out my share of the house 10 times over. More than enough to solve every financial problem either of us had ever had, and she'd never told me. In 4 years of marriage, 4 years of sharing a bed, sharing a life, sharing what I thought was everything, she had never mentioned this money, not once. Not when we were struggling to afford the down payment on our house. Not when I was working overtime to save for a surprise that she apparently never needed. Not when I was killing myself to prove I could provide for her, when she'd never needed me to provide anything at all. I called Patricia. "I saw the documents," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm, too controlled, like the eye of a hurricane that hadn't yet made landfall. "The trust account. Did you know about this?" "I just found out today. That's why I sent them immediately." Patricia paused. "This changes things, Marcus. Significantly." "How?" "Well, first of all, she should have disclosed this from the beginning. The fact that she didn't could be considered fraud. Second, depending on when the trust was funded and how it's structured, it may or may not be considered marital property. I'll need to research. It doesn't matter." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't want her money." The words came out before I had time to think about them, but I knew as soon as I said them that they were true. I never wanted her money. I didn't marry her for her family's wealth. I married her because I loved her, or thought I did, and I'm not going to become the kind of person who tries to profit from that mistake. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "That's admirable. But you should know that you may have legal grounds." "I don't care about legal grounds. I care about being able to look at myself in the mirror." Another pause. "Okay, then what do you want?" I thought about it. What did I want? Not the money, obviously. Not the house. I'd never really felt at home there anyway, surrounded by all that expensive taste that wasn't mine. Not revenge, though. A part of me wanted Meredith to suffer the way I'd suffered. "I want the truth," I finally said. "I want to know why she hid this from me. What else she's been hiding. I want to understand what the last 4 years of my life actually were. That's not something I can help you with. That's between you and your wife, ex-wife. Not yet. Not until the papers are signed." She was right. Technically, legally, Meredith and I were still married. Still bound by vows we'd both already broken. Set up a meeting, I said. He had the three of us, me, Meredith, and her lawyer. I want to have this conversation face to face. I'll make it happen. In the meantime, try not to do anything impulsive. I almost laughed. Impulsive was the last thing I was capable of being right now. I felt like I was moving through water, every action slow and deliberate, every thought crystal clear. The shock of discovery had burned away all the fog, leaving only the sharp-edged truth. My wife had been lying to me, not just about Brandon, about everything, and I was done pretending otherwise. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in early March. We convened in a conference room at Patricia's law firm, a generic space with floor-to-ceiling windows, a long oak table, and the kind of abstract art on the walls that exists solely so people have something to look at when they can't bear to look at each other. Meredith was already there when I arrived, seated at one end of the table with her lawyer, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd spent his career making problems disappear for people who could afford his rates. She looked different than the last time I'd seen her. Thinner, paler, like the weeks since our separation had taken a physical toll. Good, I thought, and then immediately felt guilty for thinking it. I took my seat across from her, Patricia beside me, and for a long moment no one spoke. The air in the room felt charged, electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia finally said, breaking the silence. "We're here today to discuss some discrepancies in the financial tool disclosures, specifically a trust account in Mrs. Holloway's name that was not initially disclosed." "My client made an oversight," the silver-haired lawyer said smoothly. "The trust was established by her parents before the marriage and has always been separate from marital assets. There was no intent to deceive." An oversight. I repeated the word flatly. $2.3 million, and it slipped her mind. "Marcus," Meredith started. "No." I held up a hand. "You don't get to Marcus me right now. You don't get to use that soft voice and those sad eyes and make me feel like I'm the one being unreasonable. I want answers, real answers. And I want them now." She flinched. Actually flinched, like I'd raised a hand to her. I'd never seen her react to me that way before, like I was someone to be afraid of. It should have made me feel powerful. Instead, it just made me sad. "Fine," she said quietly. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start at the beginning." She looked at her lawyer, who gave her a slight nod. Then she took a deep breath and began to speak. "The trust was set up when I was 21. My parents wanted to make sure I'd always be taken care of no matter what. They didn't tell me about it at first. I only found out a few years later, when I was dating Brandon. Brandon, of course." "They told you about it when you were dating Brandon," I said. "But not when you were married to me." "They said," she faltered, looked down at her hands. "They said it was better if you didn't know. They were worried you might change. If you knew how much money was there." "Change how?" "They thought you might stop trying so hard, might become complacent, or that you might try to access the money somehow, and then if things didn't work out, you'd have a safety net." I felt something cold settle in my chest. A safety net that didn't include me. It wasn't like that. "Then what was it like, Meredith? Explain it to me. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you and your parents never trusted me, not from the very beginning. You set up your whole life so that if I ever became inconvenient, you could just walk away. No harm, no foul, no financial consequences. That's not fair, isn't it?" I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Tell me something. In all those conversations you had with Brandon, all those lunches, all those texts, did he know about the trust?" The silence that followed was all the answer I needed. "He knew," I said, not a question. Of course he knew, because he was always part of the inner circle, wasn't he? always part of the family, while I was just the outsider who'd somehow managed to convince you to marry him. I love you, Marcus. Her voice cracked on the words. I know you don't believe that right now, but it's true. I didn't tell you about the money because I didn't want it to change things between us. I didn't want you to feel like you had to compete with it. So you lied to me instead. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you. That's the same thing, Meredith. When you're married to someone, when you've promised to share your life with them, keeping a secret like this is exactly the same as lying. You let me believe we were partners, equals, building something together. And the whole time, you had an escape hatch I didn't even know existed. She started to cry, quiet tears that she tried to wipe away before they fell, like she was ashamed of them. I felt nothing, no sympathy, no satisfaction, just a vast, empty space where my anger used to be. I'm not going to fight you for the money, I said. I want you to know that. I never wanted your family's wealth. I just wanted you, the real you, and apparently that was never on the table. Marcus, please. I'm done, Meredith. I stood up from the table, and everyone else rose with me. Lawyers on both sides, my soon-to-be ex-wife with her tear-streaked face. I'll sign whatever papers I need to sign. I'll take whatever's fair. But after today, I don't want to see you again. I don't want to hear from you. I want to move on with my life and forget that the last 4 years ever happened. You can't just forget 4 years. Watch me. I walked out of the conference room without looking back. Heard Patricia excuse herself and follow me. Heard Meredith call my name once, twice, 3 times before her voice faded into the distance. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I was alone. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. In the end, we sold the house, split the proceeds. I walked away with enough money for a down payment on a small condo and a fresh start that felt more expensive than any amount of money could buy. I didn't take a cent of the trust fund. Patricia had argued with me about it, said I was entitled to at least consider my options, that the court might have awarded me something given Meredith's failure to disclose, but I refused. It wasn't about the money. It was about who I wanted to be when this was all over. The man Meredith had married would have taken the money, would have seen it as justice, as compensation, as proof that he was worth something after all. But I wasn't that man anymore. I didn't need anyone else's money to know my worth. I was finally learning to define it for myself. The months that followed were quiet ones. I moved into my condo, smaller than the house, but all mine, every inch of it chosen by me for me. I threw myself into work, not to escape, but because I genuinely loved my job, genuinely found satisfaction in building things that mattered. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage, people who'd fallen away because Meredith hadn't liked them or because they hadn't fit into the life we were supposed to be building together. I started seeing a therapist. That was new for me. I'd always been skeptical of therapy, had seen it as something for people who couldn't handle their own problems. But Patricia had suggested it, and after everything that had happened, I figured it couldn't hurt. Dr. Reyes was a small woman with kind eyes and a way of asking questions that made you feel like she already knew the answers and was just waiting for you to catch up. "Tell me about your mother," she said during one of our early sessions. So I did. Told her about the poverty, the sacrifices, the way my mother had worked herself to the bone so I could have chances she'd never had. Told her about the guilt I'd always carried, the sense that I owed her something I could never repay. "And you think that's connected to your marriage?" Dr. Reyes asked. I think I was trying to prove something. To her, to myself, to everyone who ever looked at me and saw a kid who wasn't going to amount to anything. And Meredith was proof that you'd made it. Exactly. I paused, thinking about how to articulate what I was only beginning to understand. She was everything I was supposed to want, beautiful, wealthy, from a good family. When she chose me, it felt like validation. like I'd finally earned my place in the world. But I was so busy trying to be worthy of her that I never stopped to ask if she was worthy of me. Dr. Reyes smiled. That's good, Marcus. That's real insight. It doesn't feel good. It feels like I wasted 4 years of my life. Those years weren't wasted. They taught you something important. They taught you what you don't want. And sometimes that's even more valuable than knowing what you do. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. What did I want? Not money. I had enough of that. Not status. I'd learned how hollow that could be. Not validation from a woman or a family or anyone else whose approval I'd been chasing. What I wanted, I realized, was simpler than any of that. I wanted to be seen, really seen, for who I actually was, flaws and history and all. I wanted someone who didn't need me to perform, who didn't expect me to be anything other than exactly what I was. I wanted love that felt like coming home. And for the first time in my life, I believed I might actually deserve it. Summer came to San Jose like it always did, slowly then all at once. The hills turned brown. The air smelled like cut grass and hot pavement. Tech workers emerged, blinking from their climate-controlled offices to eat lunch outside, squinting against a sun that seemed almost surprised to find anyone looking directly at it. I'd been divorced for 3 months, single for 6, and somewhere along the way, without quite noticing when it happened, I'd started to feel okay. Not great, not healed, not whole, not completely over what had happened, but okay, capable, functioning in a way that suggested the worst was behind me and the future, while uncertain, was at least something I could face without dread. Work was going well. I'd been promoted in April, not because I had asked for it or even particularly wanted it, but because my manager had noticed the quality of my work improving and decided I was ready for more responsibility. The raise was significant. The new title, Senior Director of Product Development, felt strange on my business cards, but good on my resume. My condo was starting to feel like home. I'd painted the walls a color that wasn't beige, bought some art, real art, pieces I actually liked, not just things that matched the furniture. Set up a small balcony garden where I grew tomatoes and basil and peppers, tending them in the mornings before work, with a careful attention that surprised me. And I'd started dating again. Nothing serious. I wasn't ready for serious, might never be ready again, but casual dinners, coffee dates, the occasional second meeting when the first one went well. It was strange being back in that world after 4 years of marriage. Strange and scary and occasionally exhilarating. I'd told Dr. Reyes about it, expecting her to warn me off, to say I was moving too fast. Instead, she'd nodded approvingly. "You're not looking for someone to complete you," she said. "You're looking to share a life you've already built for yourself. That's healthy. That's what dating should be." I wasn't sure I believed her, but I was trying to. It was a Saturday in late July, one of those perfect California days, when the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at, when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Marcus. I know you said you didn't want to hear from me, but I need to talk to you. It's important. Please. Meredith." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the delete button. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to ignore it, to maintain the boundary I'd worked so hard to establish. Nothing good could come from engaging with her. Nothing she had to say could possibly matter. And yet, there was something in the tone of the message that gave me pause, not manipulation. I'd learned to recognize Meredith's manipulation by now, the specific rhetorical moves she made when she was trying to get something from someone. This felt different, desperate, raw. Against my better judgment, I typed back, "What is it?" The response came immediately, like she'd been waiting by her phone. "Can we meet? Just coffee. I promise I won't take up much of your time." I should have said no. I know that. But I'd spent the last 6 months learning to trust my instincts, and my instincts were telling me that something was wrong. Something had happened. And whatever else Meredith was, whatever she'd done to me, whatever lies she'd told, she was still a person I'd once loved. Still someone whose pain I wasn't capable of ignoring entirely. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., that cafe on Castro Street. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you so much. I put down my phone and stared out the window at the blue sky. Whatever this was, I was about to find out. I arrived early. I always do. It's a habit from childhood, when being late meant missing whatever scraps of opportunity might be available. Now, it just means I get to choose my seat, position myself so I can see the door, prepare for whatever's coming. The cafe was one of those artisanal places that had sprung up all over downtown in the last few years. Exposed brick, reclaimed wood, baristas with sleeve tattoos, and opinions about bean origins. I ordered a black coffee and sat in a corner booth, watching the entrance. Meredith walked in at exactly 2 p.m. She'd always been punctual. It was one of the things I'd admired about her, back when I was still in the business of finding things to admire. But there was something different about her now, something I couldn't quite identify until she got closer, and I could see her face clearly. She looked diminished. That's the only word for it. Like someone had turned down her brightness, her volume, her presence. The woman I'd married had commanded every room she entered, drew eyes without trying, moved through the world like she owned it, and was simply allowing everyone else to share in her largesse. This woman looked like she was barely holding herself together. Marcus, she slid into the booth across from me, her hands wrapping around the coffee cup she'd picked up at the counter. Thank you for meeting me. I know I don't deserve. Let's skip the preamble, I said, not unkindly but firmly. You said you needed to talk, so talk. She took a breath, let it out slowly. I could see her composing herself, gathering whatever courage she'd built up for this moment. I made a mistake, she said. A lot of mistakes, and I've spent the last 6 months realizing exactly how many. Meredith, please, let me finish. She looked up at me, and there were tears in her eyes. Not the performative tears I'd seen so many times before, but something realer, raw. After you left, I told myself I was relieved. Told myself you'd been holding me back, that my parents had been right all along, that I'd finally be free to live the life I was supposed to live. The life with Brandon. Yes. She didn't flinch from it. I went back to him, almost immediately. I thought that's what I wanted. What I'd always wanted. What I'd been denied because I'd made the mistake of marrying someone else. And it was a disaster. She laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor at all. Turns out, the Brandon I'd been carrying around in my head all those years wasn't the real Brandon. The real Brandon is petty and selfish and has no idea how to show up for anyone but himself. The real Brandon cheated on me twice in the first 2 months we were together. The real Brandon told me I was too much and too demanding when I asked him to actually be present in my life. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I'd known this would happen. Not the specifics, but the general shape of it. You can't spend years building up a fantasy and expect reality to match. My parents blame me, of course. Meredith's voice was steady now, like she'd moved past the hard part. They think I ruined everything by not making it work with Brandon. They've basically stopped speaking to me. And my mother, she stopped, swallowed. My mother told me I should have stayed with you, that at least you were reliable. At least he tried, she said, like that was the best anyone could ever say about you. I'm not sure why you're telling me this. Because I want you to know that I understand now. She reached across the table and I let her take my hand. Just for a moment. Just to hear what she had to say. I understand what I threw away. what I had and didn't appreciate. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Marcus, and I was too stupid and scared and screwed up to see it. So this is an apology. Yes. And more than that. She squeezed my hand tighter. I want another chance. I know I don't deserve it. I know I destroyed everything, but I still love you, Marcus. I never stopped loving you, even when I was too broken to show it. And if there's any part of you that still... No. The word came out quiet, but absolute. Final in a way that left no room for negotiation. No, I said again, pulling my hand away. I'm sorry, Meredith. I'm sorry things didn't work out with Brandon. I'm sorry your parents are disappointed. I'm sorry you're hurting, but I can't be your backup plan. Not again, not ever. I'm not asking you to be. Yes, you are. That's exactly what you're asking. You're asking me to be the reliable guy, the one who shows up when everything else falls apart. You're asking me to take you back because your first choice didn't work out, and you're scared to be alone. That's not fair. Maybe not, but it's true. I stood up from the booth, leaving my half-finished coffee on the table. I hope you find what you're looking for, Meredith. I really do, but it's not going to be me. Marcus, please. Goodbye. I walked out of the cafe into the bright afternoon sun, didn't look back, didn't waver. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt completely, utterly free. 2 weeks later, I got another message. Not from Meredith this time, from a number I didn't recognize. Hi, Marcus. This is Eleanor Whitmore, Brandon's mother. I was hoping we could talk. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Eleanor Whitmore was the last person I expected to hear from. She'd been Meredith's mother's best friend for 30 years, part of the tight-knit social circle I'd never been admitted to, never even wanted to join. What could she possibly want to talk to me about? Curiosity won out over caution. What about? It's complicated, and I'd rather not do this over text. Can I take you to lunch? Against my better judgment, which seemed to be a pattern lately, I agreed. We met at a restaurant I'd never been to before. Upscale but not pretentious, the kind of place where important conversations happened over equally important wine. Eleanor was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with a glass of Chardonnay and an expression I couldn't quite read. She was older than I remembered, or maybe I'd just never looked at her closely before. Silver hair, expertly styled, designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The kind of composed, elegant presence that comes from a lifetime of money and social positioning. Marcus, she rose as I approached, extending a hand that was cool and dry. Thank you for coming. I'll admit I'm curious, I said, taking my seat. We've never exactly been close. No, she smiled slightly. We haven't, but I've been paying more attention to you lately than you might think. A waiter appeared with menus. We ordered salads, because that's what people like Eleanor ordered, and I was suddenly very aware of my own working-class origins in a way I hadn't been in months. Old habits die hard. I heard about what happened with Meredith, Eleanor said once we were alone again. The cafe, her proposal. Word travels fast. In our circles, yes. She took a sip of wine. I want you to know that I don't blame you for turning her down. After what she did to you, what my son did, for that matter, you had every right to walk away. Is that why you wanted to meet? To tell me you support my decision? Partly. She set down her glass, and her expression shifted into something more serious. But mostly, I wanted to apologize, on behalf of my family, and on behalf of the Holloways. I waited. We failed you, Marcus. All of us. We saw a young man who was trying so hard to be accepted, who was doing everything right, who loved a woman far more than she loved him back. And instead of welcoming you, instead of seeing you for the good person you obviously are, we judged you. We looked down on you. We treated you like an interloper in a world you had every right to be part of. Why? Because that's what people like us do. She said it simply, without defensiveness or excuse. We protect our own. We circle the wagons around money and status and bloodlines, and anyone who comes from the outside is automatically a threat. It's ugly, and it's wrong, and I'm ashamed it took me this long to see it. What changed? Brandon. She looked down at her hands, hands that had probably never done a day of manual labor, adorned with rings that could have fed my childhood neighborhood for a month. Watching him with Meredith, watching him treat her the same way he's treated every woman who's ever made the mistake of loving him, and realizing that we enabled it. All of us. We told ourselves he was special, that the rules didn't apply to him, that whoever got hurt along the way was just collateral damage. And Meredith? Meredith made her choices. Some of them very bad ones. But she was raised by people who taught her that money could fix anything, that relationships were transactions, that love was something you fit in around the things that really mattered. Eleanor shook her head slowly. We did that. Her parents and I. We made her what she is. The salads arrived. Neither of us touched them. I'm not looking for forgiveness, Eleanor said. I know I haven't earned it, but I wanted you to know that there are people in Meredith's world, in my world, who saw what you did for her, how hard you tried, how much you sacrificed. And we're sorry. We're so sorry we didn't see you for who you really were until it was too late. I sat with that for a moment, tried to figure out what I felt. Anger? Not really. Vindication? Maybe a little. Mostly just a kind of tired acceptance. Thank you, I finally said, for telling me that. It means more than you probably know. There's something else. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, thick, cream-colored, sealed with actual wax. This is from Meredith's grandmother. She asked me to give it to you. Her grandmother? Helen. You met her a few times, I believe. I remembered Helen Holloway, a tiny woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, who'd taught English for 40 years and had a library in her house that I would have killed for as a teenager. She'd been one of the few members of Meredith's family who'd ever treated me like a human being. She's dying, Eleanor said quietly. Cancer. The doctors give her a few months, maybe less. She wanted you to have this before. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I took the envelope. It was heavy in my hands, weighted with something more than just paper. I'll read it, I said. Thank you. Eleanor nodded. Then she picked up her fork and started eating her salad, and the rest of the lunch passed in the kind of polite small talk that fills the space when everything important has already been said. I waited until I got home to open the envelope. The condo was quiet in that particular way it gets in late afternoon, when the angle of the sun throws long shadows across the floor, and the whole world seems to hold its breath. I sat on my couch, the couch I'd picked out myself, covered in a fabric I actually liked, and broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter, handwritten in the kind of elegant cursive they don't teach anymore. Dear Marcus, I hope this letter finds you well. I hope you are healing from what my granddaughter did to you. I hope you know that you deserved better, and that the failure of your marriage was not your failure. I should have said these things to you in person during one of those holiday dinners where you always looked slightly uncomfortable but never complained. I should have pulled you aside and told you that I saw you, really saw you, and that what I saw was a good man trying his best in a world that had never taught him the rules. But I was a coward. I watched my daughter and son-in-law treat you like less than you were, and I said nothing. I watched Meredith take you for granted, and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place, that young people had to make their own mistakes, that everything would work out in the end. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Marcus, you came into our family with nothing but your character and your determination, and you tried to build something real. That takes courage. That takes faith. And even though it didn't work out, even though Meredith couldn't see what she had, please know that your effort was not wasted. You showed us something. You showed us what real love looks like when it's not mixed up with money and obligation and expectation. You showed us what we'd forgotten, or maybe never knew. I am dying. The doctors have given me weeks, maybe days. I don't have time for the kind of prolonged reconciliation that might actually make a difference. But I wanted you to have this before I go. A token of my apology. A small attempt to correct a wrong. Enclosed, you will find the deed to a piece of property I own in Mendocino. It's a cabin on a cliff overlooking the ocean. I bought it 40 years ago with money I saved from teaching, every penny earned through work, not through family wealth. It was my escape, my sanctuary, the place I went when the obligations of being a Holloway became too much. I want you to have it. Not because I'm trying to buy your forgiveness, not because I think property can make up for what was done to you, but because I think you understand what that place meant to me. I think you understand the value of having somewhere to go where you can just be yourself, without performance, without expectation, without the weight of proving anything to anyone. The lawyers have all the paperwork. Eleanor will help you with the details. Please accept this gift in the spirit it's intended, not as compensation, but as recognition. Recognition that you are a good man, that you deserved better than what my family gave you, and that some of us, at least, saw you clearly. Be well, Marcus. Be happy. And please, don't give up on love. The right person is out there. Someone who will see you the way you deserve to be seen. With deep respect and deeper regret, Helen Holloway. I read the letter 3 times. Then I set it down on the coffee table and stared at the wall for a long, long while. The cabin in Mendocino, where I'd spent those transformative days after leaving Meredith. The cabin where I'd first started to understand who I might be when I wasn't trying to be someone else. Helen Holloway had given it to me. I didn't know what to feel. Grateful, overwhelmed, suspicious even, wondering if this was some kind of manipulation I couldn't see. But no, Helen had never been like the rest of them. She'd always stood slightly apart from the Holloway machinery, observing with those sharp eyes, saying little, but missing nothing. If she said this gift came without strings, I believed her. I picked up the letter again and read the final paragraph. Don't give up on love. The right person is out there. For the first time since my divorce, I let myself believe that might be true. A year can change everything. That's what I was thinking as I drove up the winding coast road toward Mendocino, the Pacific glittering to my left, the cypress trees standing sentinel to my right. A year ago, I'd been a broken man fleeing a broken marriage, not sure if I'd ever feel whole again. Now I was driving to my own cabin, my own sanctuary, the place that had somehow become the center of a life I was actually proud of. I'd quit my job 3 months after receiving Helen's letter. Not dramatically, not burning bridges or telling anyone off. Just a quiet resignation, a thoughtful explanation, a recommendation that they promote my junior colleague into my role. She'd been doing most of the interesting work anyway. I was just the one who showed up to meetings and took credit. The severance was generous. The relief was even more so. I'd moved to Mendocino full-time in September. Fixed up the cabin, nothing fancy, just repairs that needed doing and improvements that made the space feel more mine. Built some furniture with my own hands, using skills I'd learned from YouTube tutorials and books from the local library. Planted a garden that actually survived, unlike my balcony attempts in San Jose. And I'd started writing. That surprised me more than anything. I'd never thought of myself as a writer. Had always been the numbers guy, the engineer, the one who solved problems with logic and code rather than words. But something about the cabin, the ocean, the empty hours that stretched out like invitations. Something about all of it demanded expression, and the only way I knew to express it was on the page. The book had started as a journal, just me trying to process everything that had happened, trying to make sense of the shipwreck of my marriage. But somewhere along the way, it had become something more. A story about losing yourself in love and finding yourself again in solitude. A story about the lies we tell ourselves and the truths we're afraid to see. A story ultimately about learning to be enough. I'd finished the draft in April. Sent it to a few agents on a whim, not expecting anything. 3 weeks later, I had representation. A month after that, I had a book deal. Not a huge one, not the kind of advance that lets you retire, but enough to know that someone out there thought my words were worth reading. The book would come out in spring. I tried not to think about it too much. Helen Holloway had died in October, peacefully, surrounded by family. I'd sent flowers to the funeral but hadn't attended. It didn't feel like my place. But I'd kept her letter, framed it, hung it in the cabin where I could see it every day, a reminder of what she'd given me, a reminder of what was possible when even one person sees you clearly. My phone buzzed as I pulled into the driveway, a text from my mother. "So proud of you, sweetheart. Can't wait to see the book." I smiled. That was another thing that had changed this year. I'd finally told my mother the truth about my marriage, all of it, the parts I'd been too ashamed to share. She'd listened without judgment, held me while I cried, told me she'd always known something was wrong, but hadn't wanted to interfere. "You're my son," she'd said. "I would have loved you no matter what. I wish you'd known that." I hadn't known that, not really. I'd spent so long trying to prove myself worthy of her sacrifices that I'd never stopped to consider that her love wasn't conditional on my achievements. It just was, the way love is supposed to be. We talked every week now, sometimes more. She was planning to visit next month, to see the cabin and meet, well, that was the other thing, the big thing, the thing that still made me a little breathless when I thought about it. Her name was Sarah. I'd met her at the grocery store, of all places. It was December, almost exactly a year after I'd left Meredith, and I was standing in the produce section trying to remember if avocados were supposed to be soft or firm when you bought them. A woman next to me was having the same apparent crisis, frowning at the display like it had personally offended her. "Trick is to check the stem," I said without really meaning to. I'd been talking to myself more since moving to Mendocino. Sometimes it slipped out in public. "If it comes off easily and it's green underneath, it's ready." She looked at me, really looked, the way most people don't bother to look at strangers in grocery stores. She had dark hair cut short, brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, and a face that wasn't conventionally beautiful but was infinitely interesting. "That's either genius or you just made it up," she said. 50-50 odds. "I'll take those odds." She picked an avocado, popped off the stem, examined the color beneath. "Green, you might be a genius after all." I have my moments. We ended up in line together, then in the parking lot where we discovered we were parked next to each other, then at the cafe down the street where we sat for 3 hours talking about everything and nothing. Her job as a marine biologist studying coastal ecosystems, my newly minted career as a writer, the strange serendipity of two people who'd both ended up in this tiny town trying to rebuild their lives. Sarah had her own story. A bad breakup 2 years ago, not a marriage, but a 7-year relationship that had crumbled when her partner decided he wanted kids and she didn't. She'd moved to Mendocino for a research position and fallen in love with the place. Hadn't expected to fall in love with anything or anyone else. "I'm not looking for anything serious," she told me on what was technically our 3rd date, but felt like our 30th. "I hope that's okay. I need to figure out who I am on my own first." "I understand completely," I said. "I'm in the same place." And I was. I really was. But I also knew even then that something was happening between us. Something that felt different from anything I'd experienced before. Not the desperate, grasping love I'd had with Meredith. The kind that's really about proving something to yourself. This was quieter, steadier, built on a foundation of two whole people choosing each other, not two broken people trying to complete each other. We took it slow, slower than I'd ever taken anything in my life. Dinners that ended with a kiss at the door. Hikes along the coastal bluffs where we walked for miles in comfortable silence. Long conversations about our pasts, our fears, our dreams. The kind of conversations I'd never had with Meredith because I'd been too busy performing to actually connect. By spring, we were together, not officially, not with labels or announcements, but in the way that mattered, making plans that extended beyond next week, leaving things at each other's places, existing in each other's lives like we belonged there. My mother was going to love her. I parked in front of the cabin and sat for a moment, looking at the place I now called home. The new shutters I'd installed last month, the garden starting to green with early summer growth, the wind chime Sarah had given me for my birthday, singing softly in the ocean breeze. A year ago, I'd been sitting in this same spot, broken and alone, not sure if I'd ever feel anything again. Now I felt everything. Joy and peace and hope and love. Real love. The kind that doesn't ask you to be anyone other than exactly who you are. If you've ever lost yourself in a relationship and found your way back, you know what I'm talking about. You know the particular miracle of discovering that the worst thing that ever happened to you was actually the best thing, that the door slamming behind you was really an invitation to walk through a different one. I got out of the car and walked toward my cabin, toward my life, toward whatever came next, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't afraid. It was a Sunday afternoon in early August when I heard the car coming up the drive. Sarah was at work, some emergency with one of her research sites, and I was on the porch with my laptop working on edits for the book. The sound of tires on gravel was unusual. I didn't get many unannounced visitors out here. I set the laptop aside and watched the car approach. A silver BMW, expensive, familiar. My heart did something strange in my chest. Not quite fear, not quite anger. Something older than both. The car stopped. The door opened. Meredith stepped out. She looked different. Better, actually, than the last time I'd seen her. Healthier, more put together, like she'd finally stopped drowning and started swimming. She was wearing simple clothes, jeans, and a white blouse. Her hair loose around her shoulders in a way she'd never worn it during our marriage. "Marcus." She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I know I shouldn't be here. I know you said you didn't want to see me again, but I heard about the cabin, and I heard about the book, and I—" She trailed off. I waited. "I needed to see it for myself," she finally said. "I needed to see that you're okay." "I'm okay," I said, because I was, because that wasn't even a question anymore. Can I come up? Just for a minute. I promise I'm not here to cause trouble." I should have said no. Should have sent her away, maintained the boundary I'd worked so hard to establish. But something in her voice, something different from all the times before, made me hesitate. "5 minutes," I said. She climbed the steps and took the chair across from mine, folding her hands in her lap like a guest at a formal event. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind chimes sang. The ocean crashed against the cliffs below. The world went on. "This place is beautiful," Meredith said quietly. "I can see why grandmother loved it." She was a remarkable woman. She was. I didn't appreciate her enough. When she was alive. A pause. "I didn't appreciate a lot of things. Meredith, I'm not here to ask for another chance." She met my eyes, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Peace. Acceptance. The look of someone who had finally stopped fighting a battle they were never going to win. "I know that ship has sailed. I just wanted to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." "What?" "You were right. About everything. The way I treated you, the secrets I kept, the way I let my family make you feel like you didn't belong, all of it. You deserved so much better than what I gave you, and I'm sorry. I'm truly deeply sorry. I waited for the rush of vindication, the satisfaction of finally hearing her admit what I'd known all along, but it didn't come. All I felt was a kind of tired compassion for the woman in front of me, a woman who'd spent her whole life playing a role she didn't choose, trying to meet expectations that were never fair, losing herself in the process. Just like I had. "Thank you," I said. "That means something to me. There's more." She took a breath. "I wanted you to know that I've been in therapy. Real therapy, not the kind my mother approves of. And I've been doing a lot of work on myself, trying to understand why I made the choices I made, why I hurt the people I hurt. And it's hard, harder than anything I've ever done, but I'm starting to see things more clearly now, starting to understand that the life my parents wanted for me isn't the life I want for myself, starting to figure out who I actually am when I'm not, trying to be someone else's version of acceptable." I almost laughed. "That sounds familiar." "I know." She smiled, a small, sad smile that held no expectation in it. I guess we were more alike than either of us realized, both of us performing, both of us desperate to be worthy, both of us forgetting that we already were. The silence that followed was different from the silences we'd shared during our marriage. Those had been heavy, fraught, full of all the things we couldn't say to each other. This one was lighter, almost peaceful. "I'm happy for you," Meredith said. "The book, the cabin, the life you're building here. You deserve all of it. Thank you. And I hope," she hesitated, "I hope whoever she is, the woman you're with now, I hope she sees you, really sees you, the way I never did." I thought about Sarah, her easy laugh, her curious mind, the way she looked at me sometimes like I was the most interesting puzzle she'd ever encountered, and she had all the time in the world to figure me out. "She does," I said. "She really does." Meredith nodded. Then she stood up, smoothing her jeans, gathering herself for departure. "I should go. I've taken up more than my 5 minutes." "It's okay. Goodbye, Marcus. Take care of yourself." "You too, Meredith." She was halfway down the steps when she turned back one more time. "For what it's worth," she said, "I did love you. Maybe not well, maybe not enough, but I did, and part of me always will." Then she walked to her car and drove away, and I sat on my porch watching until she disappeared around the bend in the road. I didn't feel sad, didn't feel angry, didn't feel much of anything, really, except a kind of quiet closure, a chapter finally ending, a door gently closing on a part of my life that was truly, irrevocably over. I picked up my laptop and went back to my edits. There was a book to finish, a life to live, a future to build, and I was ready. If you've ever stood on a cliff and watched the sun set over the ocean, you know there's a moment, just a sliver of time between the light and the dark, when everything becomes impossibly, achingly beautiful. When the whole world holds its breath and the colors blaze so bright it almost hurts to look at them. That's what my life feels like now. I'm writing this from the porch of the cabin, my cabin still, after all these years. The wind chime is singing its familiar song. The garden is in full summer bloom, bursting with tomatoes and peppers and the kind of chaos that only grows from patient tending. And inside, I can hear Sarah moving around the kitchen, preparing dinner, humming something tuneless and happy. We got married last spring, a small ceremony on the beach below the cabin, with the ocean as our witness and only a handful of people in attendance. My mother cried. Sarah's father made a toast that went on too long and touched everyone who heard it. We danced on the sand as the sun went down, and I held her and felt, for the first time in my life, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The book came out 2 years ago. It did well, better than anyone expected, including me. The reviews called it raw and honest, and a searingly authentic portrait of love and loss. It spent 3 weeks on the bestseller list. There was talk of a film adaptation, though nothing came of it. But none of that mattered as much as the letters. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands by now, from people all over the country, all over the world, who'd read my story and recognized something of themselves in it. Men who'd been where I'd been, invisible and desperate in marriages that were slowly killing them. Women who'd been Meredith, performing roles they'd never chosen, losing themselves in expectations they'd never questioned. People of all kinds who'd been broken by love and were trying to find their way back to wholeness. I wrote back to every single one. It's become my mission now, if you can call it that. Speaking at conferences, running workshops, trying to help people understand what I wish someone had told me years ago, that love shouldn't require you to disappear, that healthy relationships are built between two whole people, not two halves desperately trying to become complete, that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. Dr. Reyes would be proud. I still see her occasionally when I'm in San Jose for an event. We have coffee, talk about how far I've come. She says I'm one of her success stories. I tell her she's one of mine. Meredith and I don't talk anymore, not because of any animosity, there's none left to speak of, but because we've both moved on to lives that don't include each other. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to Portland, started working for a nonprofit, finally broke free of her family's expectations. I hope she's happy. I genuinely do. Brandon, from what I understand, is on his 3rd marriage. Some people never learn. My mother visits twice a year now, once in spring, once in fall. She loves the cabin, loves Sarah, loves seeing her son finally at peace. Last visit, she told me something I'll never forget. "You know what I'm proudest of?" she said. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, the way we'd started doing every time she came. "It's not the book. It's not the speaking. It's not even this beautiful place you've built." "What then?" "It's that you finally stopped trying to prove you were worth loving." She reached over and took my hand, her hand that had worked so hard for so many years to give me every chance. "You finally just let yourself be loved." I cried. The way you cry when someone sees the truest part of you and names it out loud. So here's what I've learned. Here's what I wish I'd known all those years ago, standing in my kitchen, hearing my wife tell me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. Your worth is not determined by who chooses you. It's not determined by how hard you try, or how much you sacrifice, or how perfectly you perform the role someone else has assigned you. It's not determined by your salary, or your address, or the car you drive, or the family you marry into. Your worth is inherent. It exists because you exist. And the moment you start measuring it by someone else's yardstick, you've already lost. I spent 4 years of my marriage trying to be worthy of Meredith, trying to prove to her family that I belonged, trying to earn my place at a table that was never going to have a seat for me, no matter how hard I worked or how much I gave. And you know what? Even if I'd succeeded, even if her parents had embraced me, even if Brandon had never been an issue, even if everything had worked out the way I desperately wanted it to, I still would have been building my life on a foundation of sand, because I still would have been measuring my value by external validation. I still would have been one rejection away from collapse. The divorce didn't break me. The divorce saved me. It forced me to ask questions I'd been avoiding my entire adult life. Who am I when I'm not performing? What do I want when I'm not trying to please someone else? What kind of life would I build if I weren't so afraid of being alone? The answers took time to find. Therapy and solitude and more tears than I like to admit. But I found them, and they were simpler than I expected. I want peace. I want meaningful work. I want to love and be loved by someone who sees me clearly. I want to wake up in the morning and feel like myself, Not a better version or a more acceptable version, just myself exactly as I am. That's it. That's the whole list. And now, finally, I have all of it. I'm writing this for a reason. Not just to tell my story, though I hope the telling has some value. Not just to process my own experience, though that's part of it too. I'm writing this because, somewhere out there, right now someone is standing where I stood. Maybe your spouse just told you that you're not welcome somewhere you should be welcome. Maybe your partner's keeping secrets you're not supposed to know about. Maybe you've spent years trying to earn a place in a family that looks at you like an intruder, or proving your worth to someone who will never quite believe you're enough. If that's you, if any of this sounds familiar, I want you to hear something. It's not you. The problem isn't that you haven't tried hard enough, or loved hard enough, or given enough. The problem is that you're trying to fill a cup that has a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it's never going to be full. And the solution isn't to pour faster. The solution is to walk away from the cup. I know that sounds terrifying. I know it sounds impossible, especially if you've built your whole identity around being someone's partner, someone's spouse, someone's proof that they made the right choice. I know the loneliness feels like it might kill you, that the silence feels like it might swallow you whole. It won't. What will actually kill you, slowly, quietly, by inches, is staying in a relationship that requires you to disappear. Staying with someone who makes you feel like an option instead of a choice. Staying because you're afraid of what's on the other side of leaving. I'm on the other side now. I can tell you what's here. Freedom. Peace. The particular joy of waking up in the morning and knowing that today you only have to be yourself. The unexpected gift of discovering that yourself is actually pretty good company. The slow, steady healing that comes from finally giving yourself the love you've been begging someone else to give you. And eventually, not right away, but eventually, the right person. The one who doesn't need you to be anyone other than who you are. The one who looks at you and sees not a project to improve or a problem to solve, but a human being, worth knowing exactly as you come. Sarah is that person for me. She might be reading this over my shoulder as I write it, actually. She likes to do that sometimes, says it's her way of staying connected to what's happening in my head. Hi, Sarah. I love you. See? No secrets, no performance. Just two people who chose each other and keep choosing each other every day, not because they have to, but because they want to. That's what love is supposed to feel like. And if what you have doesn't feel like that, if it feels like work, like audition, like constantly trying to prove yourself worthy of someone's attention, then I want you to consider the possibility that the problem isn't you. I want you to consider the possibility that you deserve better. I want you to consider the possibility that leaving might be the bravest, most loving thing you ever do for yourself. It's December again. 3 years to the day since that conversation in the kitchen. 3 years since Meredith told me she couldn't bring me to Christmas. 3 years since my world fell apart and I discovered it was already broken. I just hadn't been paying attention. Sarah and I are hosting this year. My mother is flying in tomorrow. Sarah's parents are driving up from the Bay. A few friends from town are coming for dinner. The marine biologist who works with Sarah. The couple who runs the bookstore downtown. The retired teacher who's become something like a surrogate grandmother to us both. The cabin is decorated, not elaborately. We're not elaborate people, but with care. Lights along the porch railing. A tree in the corner of the living room, strung with ornaments we've collected together. The smell of pine and cinnamon and something delicious that Sarah's been working on all day. This is what Christmas is supposed to feel like. Not obligation, not performance, not desperately trying to impress people who've already decided you're not good enough. Just warmth, just love, just the simple joy of being surrounded by people who actually want you there. I think about that other Christmas sometimes, the one I never attended, the one where Meredith sat with her family and her ex-boyfriend while I drove north through the fog. I wonder what it was like, if she was happy, if she felt the absence of me the way I felt the absence of her. Probably not. Probably she was relieved. Probably she told herself she'd made the right choice, that I was too sensitive, too demanding, too unable to understand the complexities of her family dynamics. She was wrong, of course, but I don't hold it against her anymore. We were both playing roles we'd been assigned without ever questioning whether those roles fit us. We were both so busy trying to be what we thought we should be that we forgot to ask what we actually wanted. I wanted this cabin, this life, this woman in the kitchen singing off-key to Christmas carols, this peace that settles over me every morning when I wake up and remember that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The sun is setting now. That golden hour, that liminal space between day and night, when everything becomes impossibly beautiful. I'm sitting on the porch with my laptop, writing these final words, watching the sky turn colors I don't have names for. If you've ever lost yourself in love and found your way back, you know this moment. The moment when you realize that everything you went through, all the pain, all the tears, all the days you weren't sure you could survive, all of it was leading you here, to this place, to this person, to this version of yourself that you couldn't have become any other way. I'm grateful for December 18th, 3 years ago, grateful for the worst day of my life, which turned out to be the first day of my real one. And I'm grateful for you, reading this wherever you are, whatever you're going through, whatever decision you're trying to find the courage to make. You're going to be okay. I promise. I got a letter last month, not an email, a real letter, handwritten in an envelope with a Portland postmark. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Some things you never forget, no matter how much time passes. Dear Marcus, I read your book. I should have written sooner. I finished it months ago, but I needed time to process everything, time to sit with the feelings it brought up, time to figure out what I wanted to say. First, I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but reading your version of our story, seeing it through your eyes, I understand now, in a way I didn't before, just how much I hurt you, how invisible I made you feel, how desperately you tried, and how little I gave you in return. I was broken, Marcus. I know that's not an excuse. Broken people still make choices, and I made terrible ones. But I want you to know that I understand now why I made them. Years of therapy have shown me things about myself I didn't want to see. The way I was raised to perform instead of feel. The way I learned to protect myself by keeping everyone at arm's length. The way I sabotaged the only real love I ever had because I was too scared to let myself be vulnerable. You were right to leave. You were right about all of it. I'm doing better now. Not perfect. I don't think I'll ever be perfect, but better. I have a job I care about, working with survivors of domestic violence. I have friends who know the real me, not the polished version I used to present. I have a therapist I see every week, and a support group I attend every month, and a life that finally feels like mine. I'm not writing to ask for anything, not forgiveness, not friendship, not even a response. I just wanted you to know that your story, our story I suppose, reached someone, changed someone, gave someone the courage to look at herself honestly and do the work required to become someone better. That someone was me. I hope Sarah knows how lucky she is. I hope you're as happy as you seem in the book. I hope the cabin still feels like sanctuary, and the ocean still sounds like peace, and the life you've built continues to flourish. You were the best man I ever knew, Marcus. I was just too broken to see it. Be well. Meredith P.S. My mother asks about you sometimes. I think she finally understands what she lost when she lost you. Not that it matters now, but I thought you might want to know. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and set it on my desk next to Helen's letter, the one I still read sometimes when I need to remember how far I've come. Sarah found me there an hour later, staring out the window at the ocean. "Everything okay?" she asked, wrapping her arms around me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. Yeah. I covered her hands with mine. Everything's good. Just closing a chapter, I think. The book. The life before the book. She was quiet for a moment. Then she pressed a kiss to my cheek and said, "You know what I love most about you? My devastating charm and rugged good looks." She laughed. "Besides that, tell me, you let people grow. You don't freeze them in the worst version of themselves. Even the people who hurt you, you leave room for them to become something better." I thought about that. Thought about Meredith, working with domestic violence survivors. Thought about Eleanor, sending me that letter from Helen. Thought about all the people who'd written to me after reading the book, telling me about their own journeys from broken to whole. "Everyone deserves a second chapter," I said. "That's what I've learned. No matter how badly you mess up the first one, you always get the chance to write something new." "Even Meredith?" "Especially Meredith." I turned in Sarah's arms, facing her, looking into the eyes of the woman who'd taught me what real love looked like. She was my catalyst, you know, the explosion that burned everything down. And yeah, it hurt. It hurt like hell. But without that fire, I never would have found my way here, to this cabin, to this life, to me, to you. I kissed her forehead. So in a weird way, I'm grateful to her. She gave me the worst gift anyone's ever given me, and it turned out to be exactly what I needed. Sarah smiled, that smile I'd fallen in love with in a grocery store, the one that still made my heart skip after all these years. "You're a better person than I am," she said. "I'd probably still be mad." Oh, I was mad, for a long time, but anger is exhausting, and I'm too old and too happy to carry it anymore. "That's very enlightened of you." "I have my moments." We stood there for a while, holding each other, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The wind chimes sang. The ocean roared. The world turned the way it always does, carrying all of us forward, whether we're ready or not. "You know what today is?" Sarah asked eventually. "December 18th. 3 years. 3 years. I pulled her closer. "The worst day of my life. And the beginning of the best ones. If you've made it this far, thank you for reading. This story is fiction, but the feelings in it are real. The desperation of loving someone who doesn't see you. The devastation of discovering that your marriage was built on lies. The slow, painful, beautiful process of learning to love yourself after someone else failed to. If any of this resonated with you, if you saw yourself in Marcus's story, or Meredith's, or anyone else's, I want you to know that you're not alone. Whatever you're going through, whatever decisions you're facing, whatever voices in your head are telling you that you're not good enough or that you don't deserve better, they're wrong. You deserve love that doesn't require you to disappear. You deserve a partner who chooses you without hesitation. You deserve a life that feels like yours. And if the life you're living doesn't feel like that, if the love you're receiving comes with conditions and qualifications and the constant exhausting need to prove yourself worthy, then maybe it's time to write a new chapter. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, but I promise you, from the other side, from the place where the healing happens and the real life begins, I promise you it's worth it. You're worth it. Now put down this story and go live yours. For everyone who's ever been told they weren't welcome at the table, may you find your way to one where you belong. To the reader who stayed with Marcus through 40,000 words of heartbreak and healing, thank you. Stories like this only matter if someone reads them, and you gave this one your time and attention. To everyone who's ever shared their story with me, in letters, in emails, in conversations after talks, thank you for trusting me with your pain. You've taught me more about courage than I ever could have learned on my own. To the person standing at the crossroads right now, trying to decide whether to stay or go, you already know the answer. You've known it for a while. The hard part isn't figuring out what to do. The hard part is finding the courage to do it. But here's the secret. You already have that courage. You wouldn't be reading this if you didn't. Now use it. The cabin in this story is fictional, but the ocean is real. The characters are invented, but the feelings are true. The ending is happy, because sometimes, more often than we dare to hope, that's how the story goes.